Okay. I'm ready for you.
All right. So, you and I spoke very briefly one time, and I think it was his engagement party. And we started talking about, you asked me about why is Buddha always fat? And I joked.
I was asking just blunt questions. They're foundationally curious questions.
Of course. And, my enthusiasm, I think I told you, I've always been an amateur enthusiast of science. And back in 2004, I don't know if you remember the Dover case.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So I was asked by a student of mine who was the legislative director of the ACLU. So he introduced me to the teachers. And I was asked to debate a professor from the Science College with everybody present. And it was televised and stuff. It was the first time I'd really done something like that. But after it was over, the thing that was...
By the way, I never debate people. We can get into that later, but I just don't debate people.
Well, it was very friendly. You remember, it was very friendly.
That's not why I don't debate people. Yeah, because debates can get ugly.
Oh, they can.
Fast.
Yeah, very fast. Yeah. No, it was very respectful, but it was just on this relationship between science and spirituality, and what are the areas of that. And the thing that really got me going on it was the fact that the letters we got after that, and one was from a high school science.
Letters in response to the debate.
Yes, and was from a high school science teacher who said, I've always had this sort of spiritual impulse, but I had to leave all of that behind. And he felt that some of the things that I had shared, he felt enthused that there was the possibility for it. So that's where I've kind of ended up, being involved in a lot. And so I wanted to ask you, because of the cosmic perspective and the way that you've talked about that, how do you define spirituality? How do you look at that?
Yeah, I try not to be at the forefront of defining words.
Yeah.
I'm more reactive than proactive regarding that. I look to see how people use words, and then I see, as an educator and as a communicator, I'm not going to invent a word and then have to define it before I use it. What good is that?
Sure.
You're not using a common language at that point. You're trying to establish some other vocabulary where there's already vocabulary in play. So a lot of my effort is figuring out how people are using words. And if there's enough of a threshold of acceptance of how a word has come to be put into use, I will use the word in exactly that way, without fighting a trend, or I'll just flow right into it. Occasionally I'll pull rank on someone who thinks they're using a word correctly or authentically, and I'll say, no, you missed that one. But that's usually more for pedagogical sake rather than for argument's sake, right? Because if I can boost the vocabulary of others, or tune the vocabulary, I will, but not to the point of disrupting communication.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah,
So for me, spirituality is, of course, spirit, I think from the Latin, is breath.
Right.
When you expire, there's no longer any breath in you. So it's historically related to some understanding of what it is to be alive. And so, because if you are without breath, you are dead. So for me, spirituality are things that remind you that you're alive. Things that bring upon you a sense of wonder. And for most animals, being alive is just, I need to find food, sex, and shelter, all right? And that's the prime directive for the survival of any species. We and some other animals have the luxury of, let's just call it free time, playtime,
Right.
where you can think about things other than survival. And when you do, another source of pleasure can be to wonder. And the cool thing about science is you get to wonder and answer questions, resolve what that wonderment might have been, and it brings on a new horizon of wonderment. So it's an ever moving, advancing frontier. I was criticized, not heavily, but I was criticized some years ago when I posted the video of the double rainbow guy. I don't know if you know this YouTube video.
I don't.
It's a guy hiking in some mountain range in the United States. It might have been, I don't think it was the Rockies, but one of the offshoot mountain ranges that are popular for hikers.
Yeah.
And he's filming this early sort of, early cell phone camera, and he might have been a camcorder.
Okay.
And he makes the turn, and then he sees a double rainbow. And he's hiking alone, and he says, "Oh my God, a double rainbow. Oh." And he starts losing it emotionally. And like, there is a God, there is other. And he starts getting really emotional and spiritual. Okay. So I just simply said, this is what happens when you've never taken Physics 101. Okay. It's the optics of any rainbow. Sometimes you can see the second one if the conditions are right. And so people said, "Oh, I'm ruining his wonderment." And yes, I was. But what I'm doing is saying there are things in this world that spooked or intrigued or enlightened earlier generations of people where science has figured out what it is. And we've moved on to other things that are filled with wonder. By the way, it doesn't mean you can't feel wonder about something you fully understand.
Of course. Yeah.
I enjoy a sunset, a beautiful sunset, as would anyone. But I have added layers of appreciation of what I'm seeing. So I know how the sun is generating energy and how that energy gets from the core of the sun to the surface, through the vacuum of space, through Earth's atmosphere, reaches my retina, triggers electrochemical reactions, and I get to see what I call a sun. That's in addition to the beautiful landscape of a sunset that we all enjoy. Okay. By the way, I don't know if it's most, but a big fraction of all posters that have God quotes on it, they're of a sunset. Okay. They never have a poster of the underbelly of a tarantula.
No.
Or the teeth of a lion gnashing into the neck of a zebra.
Right.
All of which is part of nature.
Absolutely.
But those are never in the poster where they have beautiful quotes from the Bible.
No.
Okay. So I, as a sort of practicalist, I don't like isting myself other than scientist.
Sure.
But I see things as they are, not as we dream them to be.
Wish they were.
All right, or wish they were. It doesn't mean I can't dream about what I wish they were, but when it's time to assessing a reality, reality matters. And one of the great powers of science is that it can establish an objective reality like no other branch of inquiry has ever accomplished. An objective reality is something that is true no matter who investigates it, no matter what your nationality is, no matter what language you speak. You can agree on what is true. And it seems to me, if you're going to base civilization on some tenets, it might as well be on something that is objectively true. Science feeds that. That's what it does. That's all it does. So, for me, spirituality is the feeling I would get when I am in a state of wonderment. I feel a connectivity to the cosmos that transcends a rational analysis until maybe neuroscience gets in the brain and figures out what's going on when someone feels wonder or when someone has a spiritual moment.
They kind of have, like Andy Newberg, at University of Penn has kind of isolated parts of the brain that are kind of reacting whenever someone is praying or someone is meditating.
So I'm going beyond that.
You're going for that experience of...
No. I'm describing a level of science beyond what you just described.
Okay.
Which is, we know exactly what neurosynapses are being triggered when someone feels wonderment. So that you can go back in the brain, show someone a can of beans, trigger that, and then they have wonderment over the can of beans. Okay? That would mean you have full understanding.
That would be true enlightenment.
That means you have full understanding of that state of mind. Okay. So now the difference is, of course, when a scientist expressing the kind of spirituality I'm describing is not handing this, I'll even say ceding it, to some other power or some other thing. They're just saying this is, and this is how I feel. What tends to happen is when it's not a scientist having this, when it's not an atheistic scientist who's having this feeling of wonderment, then the person has an urge, a millennial long, a millennially historic urge to say, I am feeling a force outside of me, and that force has properties. It's a man, it's a woman, it's a goddess, it lives in the clouds, it's got powers, it's got wisdom, it's got rules, it's got laws. It'll tell me who I have sex with. It'll tell me who I, what to eat on a certain day of the week. Mm-hmm. Okay. That's spirituality on the level of religion, rather than spirituality just as a feeling. And so when I'm on a mountaintop and I look up at the night sky, and I'm alone, especially if I'm alone, but it can happen with others, and I have my telescope snatching photons as they pass by Earth that might otherwise continue beyond. And I know and understand the depths of the universe. I know why the planets go through retrograde. I know this. This is a connectivity to the universe that for me, I can only describe as spiritual. That's how I use the word spiritual. Sorry, that's a long answer.
No, that's beautiful.
To a simple question.
No, that's a beautiful, beautiful answer. Mm-hmm. Well, for me, so from, and I hate to use too many isms because I don't like to be limited either, but I am ordained as a Buddhist minister, and we're a modern tradition, so we have a very different approach to our history.
Our is you and all Buddhists?
Yeah, I would say that there are some Buddhists, not many though. I'll tell you, growing up over the last 30 years of studying, I've never met anybody that didn't refer to science as their understanding of, like, if you asked them how did the universe begin, they would say, well, talk to an astrophysicist. They weren't that way. And the experience of what I would say is very similar to that cosmic perspective is the mythic narrative of the tradition. So Buddha's sitting under the tree, he's trying to find an answer to suffering. He looks up at the night sky and sees Venus and says, wow, that's me shining so bright. And he has this sense of this interconnectedness, and that's where we go from. And we start from there, and then it leads into practices to help us try to integrate this perspective into our daily life. So I want to ask you, there are three main practices or teachings that are out there, and each one has, I might say, an existential sense to it, and the other being maybe more essentialist in some way.
More
essentialist in some way. Uh-huh. So, for example, the idea of the ego as being something that when it encounters reality, it usually reacts in one of two ways. The first reaction is defensive, and it tends to kind of try to make a way to kind of survive that experience in some fashion. Our practice is to try to not necessarily transcend the ego, but embrace the ego's insecurities and try to help move beyond those.
How was what you just described understood before Freud, or before anyone in the psychology world put ego on the table as a thing?
Well, there was a word that was used to describe
what
ego.
Was it?
The formation of the skandhas, it was called in Sanskrit. And that was the formation of an identity.
Okay.
And sort of
a self.
The self.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
I mean, in some ways, you could think of Buddha as like one of the first psychotherapists, because it was a really systematic approach to really helping relieve psychological suffering, more than anything else. He wasn't interested in a lot of the questions that are associated traditionally with religion, like when did the universe begin? When's it going to end? Where do we go after we die? Those kind of things. So it lends itself in some ways better. But so the one principle is this idea of realizing that your true self is, in fact, this interconnectivity. And that when you realize that...
Interconnectivity with what?
the universe.
Okay.
And that usually is, referred to in some ways like a cosmic perspective. And the essential aspect of that is the idea that, we are interconnected in many different ways, atomically, biologically, DNA, and things like that. But that existentially, if one sees it that way, it can change the way that you interact with other people. What are your thoughts on that?
Sure, I agree. I agree with 80% of what you said.
Okay.
85%.
Okay.
So it should be true that fresh perspectives on things you've perhaps always known, or learning something new that you never knew before, can change your outlook, your own understanding of yourself and your relationship to the world around you. That, I think, is one of the objectives, if not explicitly stated, is certainly implicitly given to education, especially college education, where your horizons are expected to be broadened, particularly if you come from a small town and then you go to a big college and then you take classes on things that no one told you about that even existed in the world. So I don't put a cosmic perspective as a unique way to enlighten a person or to give them a new outlook. I think anything that you didn't know before about anything has that potential. About anything. Think about how eye-opening it is to be raised devout, Orthodox Christian, and then you take a class on comparative religion. And then there's these other religions you didn't know anything about. There are 1 billion people worshiping this person, and you never even heard of that person. So that's got to be eye-opening. And that makes no reference to the universe. That's just culture. That's just human conduct. So I value being challenged every day by some new idea that I've never thought of. And I was once asked, I get asked with some frequency, what books am I reading? Okay. And for articles. Sure. And one of them is, what books are on your shelf right now? Like at your bedside. And I listed the books I have, and they were surprised. One of them was even Barry Goldwater's The Conscience of a Conservative. Why are you reading that? I thought you were liberal. So there's a high expectation that you will only feed yourself things that you already know or agree with. Well, that's the least healthy posture you could possibly have if you want to be someone who is a lifelong learner. Okay, so now let me get back to your Buddhistic comment. This is the 15% where I don't see where...
Yeah.
I can say and make the objectively true statement that the universe is in us, that the molecules in your body were forged, atoms in your body were forged, not all of them, many of them, others were forged at the Big Bang. All right, you get the base elements. Then you get others that enable all the complex biochemistry that allows biodiversity, and those were forged in the centers of stars. Stars that you see in the night sky, that's scattered across the galaxy, allowing gas clouds to condense with the enriched materials that will give you planets and life and people. So as I've said before, not only are we in the universe is in us. But that is a different statement from saying there's some living, I'm putting words in your mouth, some living two-way street between me and the universe itself.
Yeah, I get that.
You implied, I forgot what exact words you used, you implied that because of this, we're connected to the universe. And that there's some, and connected means there's some communication channel. Relationship.
Right.
And I'm saying, okay, you can believe that because we live in a country where beliefs, especially religious beliefs, are protected.
Sure.
But I'm telling you that the connection, if you want to think of one, is the knowledge that your atoms came from stars.
Right. It's not necessarily coming from that. It's coming from you.
I'm just saying it's a new understanding of where you came from.
Yeah.
It is not a communication channel with the universe.
Okay. Yeah.
That's where I differ in that 15%. But the rest, sure.
Yeah.
And by the way, the universe is a particularly potent source of giving you a new way of thinking about things. Somebody called it the overview effect. I don't like that, because especially since it only refers to Earth.
That was for the astronauts.
Yeah, exactly. You're in orbit and you see Earth, not as a let the people only listening to this know that I just picked up a schoolroom globe of the Earth, and it has no clouds, of course, because you want to be able to see all the countries, and all the countries are color-coded. This is not what you see from space. This is a lie. This is what human beings do who are fundamentally tribal and must carve themselves up in all kinds of different ways by who they worship, by what their skin color is, by where they're born, and they have to color code it all and put up walls and boundaries and barriers. And now you can't even cross from one colored boundary to another on a globe unless you have special permissions and special papers. Other people have to give permission for you to move on your own fucking planet.
Yeah.
Sorry for the language.
It's true.
So, the overview effect, you see Earth as the universe sees it.
As it is.
With oceans and mountains and land and clouds. Yeah, you're a different person at that point.
When H.P. Lovecraft looked up into the universe, he was terrified and saw it as this monstrous thing where he was this insignificant dot. And from that...
He went into that with an unjustifiably high ego to begin with. Only then can you feel bad about seeing how small you are. If you go in with no ego, it's a marvelous revelation.
And I would say that's the practice.
That however small you are, you're a part of this unfolding of events.
And that would be the one principle that we would engender, is that if you do see it that way, then you're seeing it from a perspective that's not clear. That the ego is too much involved, so to speak.
Evidence of that was that your ego got harmed by learning objective truths about the universe.
Right. Now, one of the things we try to also do, another principle that we try to learn from the universe to understand what we are and what to be and what to do in some fashion. So one of the things we engender is this idea that another principle of oneness is that because the universe is constantly changing, that we have to learn from that and how to do that. So one of those things is the idea that the stars that gave life to us, as you were saying before, that we can translate that into the supernovas in our own life, but see it as an opportunity to create something new.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that's true of the universe, that it creates new things only out of that type of process?
Sure, but I think it's a powerful metaphor.
Yeah.
Although you described it as though it was a literal truth rather than a metaphorical truth. So I would come to that metaphorically and say, in the universe, stars are born, they live out their lives, they die. Some explode violently in their region, but provide significant elements for a next generation of stars to be born more enriched than the previous one. And enrichment is a little bit of a bias because we're made of that enrichment. But if you were a purist and say, I want a pure universe of only stuff that was made in the Big Bang, you would view that as pollution. The nitrogen and oxygen and silicon and iron, this is like pollutants in the gas cloud. Well, the pollutants make something interesting from our point of view. It makes planets, it makes life. So I'm perfectly content with drawing metaphor from the universe. There's a lot to get from that.
Yeah.
But to say that is doing it, therefore you must do it, I'll just say that is doing it. That's an interesting way to look at what could be transitions in your life or motivational forces operating in your life. And
Yeah, I mean the reason
you could talk about a chrysalis and a worm becoming a butterfly. And is that you moving through middle school, trying to figure out what you are, and then you have wings, you don't even know you have wings, and then you spread your wings, and now you excel. I just use that with a butterfly, without any reference to supernovas, stars, gas clouds, Big Bang, or anything. So literary metaphor is potent. It can be potent, particularly to a literate person who can see and appreciate its meaning. But I'm not going to over-ascribe phenomenon in the universe to what we pick and choose from that phenomenon that would enhance our lives.
Well, and I would say definitely the endeavor of our practice, I mean, my whole thing is to help relieve suffering and help people in that sense. And so the metaphor...
You might have heard me say that once, too. Someone asked me, what is your day? And I say, I just want to accomplish 3 things. I want to learn something new. I want to reduce the suffering of others. And, damn, there's a third one I forgot. Learn something new, reduce suffering of others. And, there's a third one. Maybe it was only those 2.
I know the first one.
Yeah. If when I say reduce the suffering of others, let me be more precise. I have certain abilities, I have certain resources, and I could be like Jesus and give all of my belongings to the poor, but that is not what I'm going to do, and that's not what I mean by lessening the suffering of others. What I mean is there something you could do in a day that's hardly any skin off your back that can completely transform a person's day? Or make a really big difference in their life with making hardly any difference in your life? I think we need more of that vector. All right? That way you're not suffering. But what did it take for you to... You're walking home. I do this essentially every time. If I walk out with a doggy bag from a restaurant, if I pass a homeless person, I hand them my doggy bag.
Yep.
I'm not going to miss that food.
That's what we do.
I'm not going to miss that food.
No.
I'll think, gee, that was a really good, chop that I was eating. But that person will appreciate it far more than I will the second time I have it. Little things like that. This is what I mean when I say I want to lessen the suffering of others. Okay? And I'm not claiming sainthood here.
No, I understand that.
I'm just, but it's in me every day.
Yeah.
So
it's an intention.
That's a good word. It's an intention. So I just echoing your
notion
that
Absolutely.
You have certain principles that you want to lessen suffering.
Well, and when we look at the universe and we drive metaphors from it, our effort is to try to help derive metaphors that will help relieve the suffering that occurs. Because the basic, simple teaching is that with our thoughts, we create our experience of life in the world. And so whatever metaphors we're going to use, we have the choice or the option to choose metaphors that help free us that way. So instead of seeing the universe as like some terrible, scary, empty thing, I every morning my practice is I get up in the morning and I take a refuge in the cosmos. I really try to engender that in my daily life, but then to help others to experience something like that. And maybe not in that same fashion, but...
So for me,
That's why I wanted to ask you, what are your practices?
Let me say, I'll get to that in a minute, but let me say what you said, but slightly differently.
Okay.
All right?
Yeah.
It's my duty as a scientist to not miss anything that's happening in front of me, because I might have to fold it into some new idea, some new understanding, some new hypothesis to get a more precise record of an objective reality that's out there. So, when I look in the universe, there is some horrific stuff that happens in the universe. So for you to get valuable metaphors, you are cherry picking what actually happens in the universe or what happens in nature. For my money, I would say you need to be self-aware that you're cherry picking. You're not talking about an asteroid strike that renders 80% of the life forms on Earth extinct, ending life. No, that's not the metaphor you're reaching for. Oh, okay, how about when the moon formed. It was a Mars-sized object that slammed into Earth, rendering Earth's surface molten, sterilizing Earth, jump-starting whatever previously had happened. We had to restart it. That's not where you're reaching for. You're reaching for the beautiful metaphors. You're reaching for the ones that you know will work in the human condition. And as a result of that, my point is, because I see all the rest of that, I don't want to put words in your mouth, so tell me if I do so incorrectly or misunderstand. I'm not left in a position to say the universe has some special place in my heart, in total. No, I can cherry pick the universe in ways that can have a special place. But if you take the whole universe, it is as terrifying as it is joyous.
Yeah. When you look at it realistically, we have this idea that life is filled with suffering and life is rough. And you have to kind of accept that first before you can move to the other. But we ultimately have this idea that I call it the cup of water koan, and in Zen we have these koans, or these stories or questions that help us to try to have a sense of oneness. But I always say that the glass with water in it, and we call it a glass, we call it water. It's neither half full nor half empty. It's just what it is. But that I have the ability to choose to see it in a certain way if I wish. Mm-hmm. And it really only matters if I'm thirsty. So.
By the way, the better scientists are not pre-channeled to see it one way or another. And so for me, actually, I don't see a glass, I see it the way you see it, the way you just describe it. I see it just as a vessel that has some order in it. I'm not judging the fullness of that glass. It just is a thing in that moment. So the moment you say it's half full or half empty, you are pre-biasing
You've decided.
an assessment of what's going on.
You projected onto it something.
Right. And you know the geeky answer, reply to that.
No, what is it?
Okay. The optimist says it's half full. The pessimist says it's half empty. The engineer says you have chosen a vessel that is the inappropriate size to contain what's in it.
I like that.
Because they want to make sure everything works and everything is the right. It's got to.
It's just right.
Otherwise, you wasted glass, right? You don't need that much glass. Use that glass for something else.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's a good one. But the same anthropologists have done this, or are they anthropologists? Who would it be? It would be.
What's that?
Social anthropologists have said things like, they'll say, "Oh, well, eagles will find a mate and they mate forever," and so they're trying to use it as
monogamy metaphor.
Yeah, monogamy metaphor.
Right,
they find, or they'll say. They'll pick some species of animal out there that exhibits a behavior that you now want to reflect upon as or absorb as part of your own human behavior. Right. But it omits the fact of what goes on with bonobos. Right. Okay?
Right.
These are chimps where they're having sex all the time. They have sex to solve arguments.
Yes,
they don't.
I know. I've written about them.
Okay. Right. That's a whole other thing. Then is it the mole rat? There's some species of rodent where one of them, they're very close to one another genetically. In fact, there's one gene flipped between one species and another. One of them are monogamous, and the other is completely not monogamous. Like they're just mating with anybody at all times, wherever they and there's one gene flipping between them. So if you wanted to cherry pick nature, you could do that.
Sure.
But by doing so, you're ignoring the rest of nature. And it happens on other levels. You say we should not kill another living thing. Well, you kind of just did when you bathed with antibiotic soap. You killed millions of bacteria that were trying to pitch tent on your skin. All right, but you don't care about them because you can't see them, can you? Oh, so they don't exist in your life, but they're out there, okay? Oh, you have a bug zapper because you don't want to get bitten by a mosquito that could kill you with malaria. Right. It's okay to kill the mosquito. How about the tick that's crawling up your leg? What are you going to do with that? You're going to kill it. unless you're some really extreme religious order that doesn't even kill, and I know they've existed.
Like
where
Jains.
Jainians, right?
Yeah,
Okay,
right.
that's extreme. But compared to others, I'm just saying, to say I don't want to kill another living thing, well, hand me the dope spray, or the
I know what you're saying.
right.
Yeah.
So as a scientist, I can't value judge one thing or another.
Yeah.
The vegetarian says, I don't want to kill anything. You are killing plants every time you eat. The vegans who don't eat milk and honey, when milk and honey are the only foods that you can consume that has nutritional value that did not derive from killing something. Everything else eaten by carnivores and vegetarians was once alive.
Right.
Okay? Yeah. Yet vegans do not eat milk and honey for the reasons stated, we all know, because it was intended for some other purpose and you don't want to interfere with that, but give me a plant so I can kill it.
Well, yeah, no.
Okay,
I
so
agree.
I'm just saying, again, I'm not judging it.
Yeah.
I'm saying as a scientist, I cannot ignore it.
Yeah.
If I'm getting an accurate understanding of what's out there and what I might draw from out there as how it might relate to my behavior.
Absolutely. Or ideally, the practice that we engender is not knowing and then bearing witness to what is and trying as much as possible to realize that my perceptions of what is are always going to be limited.
That's why we invented science.
Yeah, that's why
because your perceptions are hopeless. I don't say they're hopeless. They are the human sensory system is so fraught with error that science did not take taproot until we started inventing machines to replace our senses to do the measuring for us. Only then did we achieve an understanding of objective reality. That all began basically around 1600 with Francis Bacon and with Galileo and their writings and their practices. The methods and tools of science that we think of today as modern science are traceable to then. And it's not an accident that in those 10 years, between 1600 and 1610, saw the invention of the microscope and the telescope. Arguably the two most potent tools in the arsenal of a scientist, allowing you to look in both directions.
Both directions, yeah. The small and the big.
Right.
Well,
so you can say you're frail or susceptible, or what's the word you used? You don't know.
Not knowing.
Not knowing, and you might get it wrong. Sure.
You want to question everything.
I got a machine that's going to get it right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I'm done with that. Mm-hmm. Take me to the next problem.
Mm-hmm. Joseph Campbell, some years ago, he was the mythologist. He said that our culture is the first culture where how things work and why they matter have not been the same. Because older cultures, they had their ideas of creation myths, they had ideas of why things happen. And one might not say it was, obviously it wasn't science or anything like that, but they had some idea of how it worked, but it was intimately connected to why it mattered. And there was an interview with Carl Sagan back in the 70s where he said that science is our myth. I just wonder what you thought about that.
It's an interesting idea. I don't have a fundamental objection to it, but I can say that there are many more things that work in modern times that were ever even dreamt of in ancient times. I have a telephone, I have a car, I have an airplane. So what worked in the day was extremely limited. And the only things they cared about that worked were things that mattered to their survival. Here, we care about things that work that just give us pleasure. Does the cinema work? Does the IMAX? Does the stove work? Does the ordering out work? Does the app work? So I see that as a statement of fact, not an indictment of our times.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't see it as an indictment, but I think...
I bet he had a tone of that in it.
Well, I think what he was saying was, again, my opinion, but that having a sense of how things work, being connected to why things matter is important.
That's why he's passing judgment on it. That's why I said this.
That's what I'm saying. That's what.
Okay,
that's
so
what
he's
said.
indicting modern times as absent that. And I'm saying we have so many things that work that it goes beyond the stuff that matters. So, but we still have plenty of things that matter. Plenty. So I don't.
Well, I don't know, exactly.
Actually, I have to reveal a bias here, if I may.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
My bias is, because I read a lot of history.
Sure.
Not as a historian would. I read the history of just how people thought about things.
Yeah.
Not history of events. Okay. So that's why I'm not counting myself
More
among
a take on
among
history.
a take.
Yeah.
So I don't want to count myself among the ranks of historians because they do it right. I do it just to see how people's thinking pivoted, shifted, evolved over the centuries as motivated by the introduction of science and technology in their lives. Okay. And my bias is, anytime someone says, we are living in special times, no. I'm sorry, I'm not buying it. I'm not agreeing with that on principle. You think it's a special time because you're living in this moment. So of course everything to you is special. Of course. That people say, oh, the pace of discovery is unheralded. We live in a golden era, When you live on an exponential curve of anything, every point on that curve looks like you are in a special time. When you have exponential growth, it does this, right? And so you hear, look, just in the last few years, look what happened. Now, a few years after that, it grows 10 times this. So all of this gets pressed down, and now you have 10 times that, and the person there says, look how far we've come. We're living in special times. An exponential leap after that, all this is 10 times that. So everybody thinks they're living in a special time, but they're actually not. Yeah. Okay, so now he's going to say, this is the first time ever that this... Okay, everybody in their day has a first time ever story.
Sure.
Everybody.
Yeah. Well, that's true.
I'm not even done here. In the year 1900, the Brooklyn Daily Eagle. All right? Never heard of it. Brooklyn Daily Eagle is a newspaper. December 31st, 1900, they had a pull-out section for the new century.
Okay.
Predictions for the new century. One of the statements was, by the way, we had just come off of steamships across the Atlantic, railroads across continents, dirigibles. In there was the following sentence. We can scarcely imagine that transportation in the 20th century will advance as far as it has in the 19th.
Sure. Yeah, no,
and 3 years later, the airplane is invented. So that's what he felt.
Sure.
And there were great advances in just the last 20 years of it. The bicycle, all kinds of things we take for granted today happened in that period of time. Within 20 years, we had airplanes flying between continents. Within 20 years of that, we were flying across the ocean. Within 20 years of that, we were landing on the moon. Oh, we're living in special times. Oh.
Well, yeah, humans are terrible prognosticators.
This is my point. Not only terrible assessors of the time in which they live.
Right.
So that's my bias against anybody who's saying, "Oh, the children of today, they're..."
Well, right, they're worse than they were, and then you read something from the 1800s, a dad talking about his children, and it sounds exactly like something.
Exactly, and there's a quote. What was it? The children of today. It is clear the end of the world is near. The children of today don't mind their parents, and people are cheating in economics or whatever, and it's clear the end of the world. And there's like Seneca from 3000 BC. So there's some, I forgot who, but it was somebody just talking about how bad the world was.
Yeah.
And if the world was actually that bad and headed downward, we'd be back in caves right now, and we're not.
Yeah. Well, I always tell people that the zombie stuff is fun when there's like some kind of apocalypse, but that's not typically how we are. We actually got here because we came out of pretty tough backgrounds. So I'm with you on that.
And of course, in 100 years from now, they'll say, back in 2019, they had it tough. Yeah, all they had was a smartphone and self-driving cars. Look what we have today, and who knows what that is. So you're quoting Campbell
Yeah, yeah.
saying that these times are different and special and lamenting some earlier time. I'm not going there.
Of course.
I will not put on rose-colored glasses and say the past was better than the present. And that's a bias. And maybe I could be wrong now or especially wrong one day, but there's so much violation of understanding of what the present is relative to the past that on principle I'm not going there.
Yeah, no, I dig that. When Sagan said science is our myth for today, some people tied that to what Campbell was saying. That science has to go beyond just how things work, that there should be, maybe should's not the right word, but somehow why it matters could be connected to that. Could be, let's say.
Sure.
Not has to be.
There's some fraction of all science that is conducted that really, really matters to health, to wealth, to security, to the future of nations, to the future of civilization. In fact, probably nothing matters more than the shepherding of science in wise ways as we go forward. No question about it. Not all science. I can list science that really doesn't impact your life. But the science that does, I think that requires some wisdom. And by the way, it's not always the scientist who would deliver that wisdom. You need people who are deep thinkers, but that room should not be absent a scientist.
Right.
Because a scientist will know things about what was just discovered that the theologian won't, that the ethicist won't, and that needs to be in there and on the table. So to say, I don't want a scientist telling me how my future should be, well, at the moment, they know more about that than you do. So you want other people in the room? Fine, let's set up those systems. Let's set up that infrastructure to reach that. And this happened with, of course, the nuclear weapons. Nuclear power became nuclear weapons, and there's a whole ethical dimension to this that was addressed by many sort of citizen scientists over the years.
Yeah. Well, I think that that's the kind of thing I try to do in my conversations or when I go around universities and talk. Like you'll have usually like these divides between religious people and people that are more scientifically oriented. And it seems to me that
You haven't talked about this divide with me yet.
the divide is the idea that religion seems to be trying to catch up to science in a lot of theological movements. That, in fact, the conversation wouldn't even be there, per se, if there wasn't this shift around how things work being very different from how it used to be. So that now a lot of religious thought is catching up, trying to adjust itself to what science means, or trying to relate it. Like, of course, it's like the Big Bang Theory. The Jesuit priest that kind of was a part of that was seeing that as sort of relating it to Genesis.
No, he wasn't. That's false.
Well, that's not true?
That is
okay,
false.
Well, that's something that I read.
Other people wanted to claim that
Okay, well,
because he was a Catholic priest. Okay?
Okay.
So
That's good to know, because that's something I had read.
No.
Yeah.
No. It's easy how one might think that. So you say, a Jesuit priest puts Einstein's theories together, comes up with the Big Bang, and then there's a Genesis, and he's a Jesuit priest. You look at his writings about people saying that about him, and he denies it.
Okay.
Right.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. That's correct.
Yeah, because that's something I had read, and so people were always making that kind of connection. So maybe that's the question. Is there a divide?
Yes, there is. And the divide is when there is a religion who wants to make statements about physical reality that can be objectively shown to be false. But you have to believe those statements because the book that you got it from is asserted to be divine and unerring. That is the divide. Enlightened religious people, there is no such divide because they see it metaphorically. They get their spirituality from. You know what Thomas Jefferson did with the Bible? You know?
I do. Yeah. Well, he took out all the miracles
Took
and all
it
the
all
things.
out. Took it all out.
Yeah.
That's an example of saying there's wisdom in here, but that wisdom is not contained in the miracles. or the mythical magical stuff that Thomas Jefferson physically cut with scissors the passages out and pasted back onto the page what remained.
Yeah, I know.
It's in the National Archives.
I've read the copies of it.
Right. Yeah. It's so.
Well, that's why.
So if you don't do that, you're stuck.
But don't you think that?
And then science and civilization, frankly, will just leave you behind.
Right.
And you can fight that. That's the divide. Enlightened religious people, there's no divide.
Right. What do you think about it is? What do you think it is about enlightened religious people that is different in that sense? Then,
because they care about objective reality. Mm-hmm. They care about what is true rather than what they want to be true, or what they believe to be true.
Yeah. No, I agree.
That's and these tend to be the more relaxed religions where they're not so animated about how you interpret something that you read or what the specifics of your belief. As long as at the end of the day you believe in God or Jesus is an important character, then they're happy with you. Or, I'm slowly learning more about Islam, but the conflict comes about if your religious writings don't really give you wiggle room for something to be different from what you're reading.
This might be too big a question, but do you think that like the brilliance of certain people like Avicenna or Averroes and folks like that during a certain period, and then I've seen your video on the idea that there was like a golden age, and then it sort of
Islam.
Of Islam.
Yes.
You mentioned Islam, so made me think of it. Do you think that's possible in this day and age?
That was possible. A golden age?
The same sort of thing that happened there, which...
You have to repeat certain conditions that even Islam did not repeat after the golden age. So this is very hard to do. You need an excuse to get very different people together and sit them at a table and have them exchange ideas that come from their walks of life. And then you don't shun them. You don't kick them out because they disagree with you. You don't kick them out because they look different from you. You explore the ideas. And out of this, generally what comes out of it is not the sum of ideas, but some ideas have to be discarded in the face of other ideas that are more valid or completely valid because they've got better experiments or they're deeper thinkers or they're smarter or whatever. That's what went on in the golden age of Islam. Baghdad as a trade route between Christians and Muslims and
it was like the center.
Doubters. It was and economics brought it together. I mean, there's other practicalities about this. But today, when people with opposing views get together, they fight. They don't say to themselves what scientists say to each other. Here's what a scientist says. We're having a conversation and we disagree. We don't say this because we know it. Either I'm wrong and you're right. Either you're wrong and I'm right, or we're both wrong. Now let's continue the conversation. Whereas today you have people in a conversation, particularly if religion or politics is at the foundation of their beliefs, and they will say, I am right and you're wrong, and it's my job to convince you why you're wrong. It's not our mutual job to find some truth wherever that truth might land. Without that landscape, you're not going to have a golden age. And that golden age went for centuries. The moment someone says, I have the unassailable truth, and the rest of you are wrong, and I have the power to enforce this truth, that's the end. You're done.
That doesn't happen in science ever? Do you think that people...
What specifically?
Well, like, there was... H.G. Wells once said, if you really want to really piss off one scientist, have a slightly different view than they have. And the idea that sometimes...
On the frontier?
Yeah, like
we have fights all the time.
Yeah, like that.
But we know. We have fights all the time
which is good.
On the frontier.
Yeah.
You go to conferences, there are people...
I've seen that.
I'm surprised when people say the scientists are trying to protect their cherished ideas. Excuse me, you've never been to a scientific conference. Your job in the audience of someone's talk is to find a reason why that person is wrong. That is your job. Because if you can find a reason they're wrong, first that meant they didn't do as much homework as they should have. But this is the honing, the cultivation of you being as dispassionate about your work as possible in your analysis, not in your drive. You'll be very passionate in why you do it. But when you stand up, if someone finds a bias in your work, oh my gosh. So, yeah, you can pick fights. Sure, now finish your thing that H.G. Wells says. What was it?
Oh, no, that was just his quote. He was saying that scientists can be very dogmatic as well sometimes. And I don't think that's the thrust of the science.
So the dogmatism is not, I'm right, you're wrong, and I'm going to rise to power and suppress you. The dogmatism is, how much data will it take to convince you? Someone else in the room say, the amount of data there, I'm convinced. You're more pig-headed about it. Not pig-headed, what's the, hard-headed about it? Bullheaded, thank you. I'm trying to, what animal is it? You're more bullheaded about it. I need more data. This is what happened with continental drift.
Right.
Okay, it kind of fits together like a puzzle. Right. That's just coincidence. I need more, that's not enough for me. Okay, well, the fossils match at the same sedimentary layers on one continent to the other across the Atlantic. I can still explain that away. Maybe there was a land bridge. Maybe the Atlantic wasn't always there. Yeah. I got this. There's a mid-Atlantic ridge, and it shows this continental plate and the other one is separating. We're there. We're done. You convinced me.
Yeah.
Let's move on. Yeah. There it is. Yeah. So do you want to say I'm dogmatic?
It's evidence-based.
It's evidence-based dogmatism, if you will. Okay. But dogma has so many other uses that where if you're going to, so many uses, the way dogma is typically applied, it misrepresents what actually happens between two scientists. So you can use it. That's why people are saying, oh, you have faith that gravity is going to work. Is that how you really want to use the word faith? Really? Yeah. Okay, so the faith that gravity works comes from 300 years of evidence experimentally testing it. So yeah, I have faith that the next time I sit in the chair, it's not going to collapse.
Well, like an electron.
If you want to call that faith, fine. But now when we talk about faith in the divinity of Jesus, then do you have 400 years of testable evidence? No, you don't. Totally so it's really based on, it's faith based on faith. Yeah. So mine is faith based on evidence. So therefore I had to modify the word just to apply in my case versus your case. Yeah. So we're back where we started.
Sure. So I wanted to ask you, so what are your practices? Like I do certain practices, and of course they're typically meditation, mindfulness, that tries to keep me in that practice of not knowing and wanting to learn and bear witness to what is, and then, work with that reality. Do you have anything like that you do besides the actual?
I look for things that I don't know, and I try to learn about them. Now, that's not every moment of every day. Sure. There's certain movies I'll watch for the 30th time. I know what's going to happen in the movie. There are no surprises. So that's not putting me in a new place. But I get pleasure from certain films because they make me laugh or they're cinematically beautiful. So there are plenty of places where I'm redundant with myself. No doubt about it. But I like seeing other points of view. One of the highest compliments I ever got, I was at a CVS or something, one of these modern drugstores that sells everything. Right. And there's a person in line who thinks he recognizes me, but is not quite sure. This is some years ago where that was a more realistic kind of encounter. Okay. You think you saw someone, but maybe you don't. Yeah, is it someone you know that you met last year, or is it someone famous, but you don't know? All right. I'm sitting there, I'm waiting in line at the checkout, and then there are these impulse items. And this is like in April or something, or March of a year, and there was a Life magazine special issue, and it says, it had Jesus on the cover, because Easter was coming. It had Jesus. And Jesus as described by multiple cultures. That's what this, if my memory serves, that what this article was about. Yeah. Right. It was a whole issue devoted to this.
I've seen those.
The many faces of Jesus.
I've seen those, they come out.
They come out. They're very timely and topical. Right. At Christmas time, they do it as well.
Yeah.
So this was an impulse item. I'm looking at it, I reached up and bought it. That's when he confirmed that I was Neil deGrasse Tyson. Because he said Neil deGrasse Tyson would pick up something
That's a compliment.
that was outside of his world just to read about it. And I said, wow, that was a moment.
That's a moment. Right.
So I took that as a high compliment.
Yeah.
And so,
Absolutely.
but you can't see what you don't know unless you're alert. All right? If most people only see things they recognize, that's why you see, Abe Lincoln in the clouds or George Washington. You don't see lobsters in the clouds because you're not a lobster. You see human faces in the clouds. You don't see amoebas in the clouds. You see things that you're familiar with. And so to be a good scientist, you have to notice things you're not familiar with and have them stand out and say, do I understand that? No, let me look a little further. That keeps me young. Children are curious. You ever see a kid, 8-year-old, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, they're going, I don't know what this is. Let's turn this over. They're not saying, I don't know what this is, therefore I'm not going to touch it. I don't know what this is, therefore I will touch it. Yeah. And by not losing that sense of curiosity about the unknown, an adult scientist is simply a kid who never grew up.
I like that. You're one of, at least it seems to me, the few people that becomes very passionate about the cosmic perspective and says things about it that are similar to like what Carl Sagan said. Mm-hmm. Do you feel, is that something that just happened, or was that something that you feel called to in a special way?
Most, if not every one of us who studies the universe carries some form of a cosmic perspective with us. We encounter it every day. We see it in our calculations. We all looked up and wondered, if not in youth, then later when we finally discovered the universe or when the universe discovered us. For me, I would have to say it was a calling just because it started very early when I didn't know anything about anything. And then I looked up and I wanted to know more about the universe than I wanted to know more about anything else. So the universe became front and center. And the cosmic perspective is something you glean as you learn every new bit of information that's out there. There's not a course in a cosmic perspective. It's a, oh my gosh, this is where the elements come from. Oh my gosh, that's how the sun makes energy. Oh my gosh, this galaxy, this beautiful spiral galaxy, rotates in this way. We have a black hole in the center. I just learned about black holes. There's one right there. Oh my God. All of this is a sense of wonderment. And I think the universe is particularly potent in its capacity to trigger wonder in people. Other fields can do it, but and I don't think I'm biased here. I think it's real. When you consider, the Buddhists might be different, animists are surely different, but when you consider, most people place the deities they worship in the sky.
Yeah.
The sky looking up is a special place.
Well, the sun, the symbol of the sun was off.
Everybody's gods are in the sky.
Right. Zeus, Jupiter.
They're all in the sky.
Indra.
If they're not in the sky, they're high on a mountain looking down.
Lightning.
They're all high on a mountain looking down.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
You knew about Indra. Very good. Not many people know about Indra. There's a constellation. Well, Indus is a constellation, actually. So.
I'm an amateur, but I'm.
Okay, that's very good. Actually, to be an amateur astronomer is a badge of honor, unlike being an amateur neurosurgeon. You don't want to go to the amateur neurosurgeon. You want to learn the night sky? Find an amateur astronomer who leads with that information, and you will be the expert in the night sky. So I think the sky and what's above your head has a special place within us as a species, because we've all looked up and we've all wondered. It's been argued, and I don't know if it's been argued completely convincingly, but it's been argued intriguingly. Humans are completely comfortable sleeping on our backs. Most mammals, this is an unthinkable posture when you go to sleep. You're exposed, okay? We sleep on our back without any hesitation. And what time of day do we sleep? At night. If you wake up at night and you're sleeping on your back, you see the night sky. Every other mammal asleep at night, when they wake up, they're looking at the ground. So we have the capacity, historically, possibly even genetically, to fold the night sky into our dreams, into our passive thoughts about who we are and where we came from. So perhaps this relationship we have with the night sky is special because of that simple fact.
That's beautiful.
I think I need more evidence
Sure.
for that
Sure.
going forward, but that's kind of intriguingly
It
true.
is,
It's
very
intriguing.
much. Well, especially because all early theology, we're going to call it, is all based on the stars. It's all based on that kind of.
Right. They don't base it on where the dirt is.
No.
Unless you're an animist.
Well, right, animists did, but
They did.
usually they had a henotheism or somebody at the
Okay.
top
Okay.
who was still up there in
Still,
the sky.
still holding the strings.
Oh,
yeah. And they were in the sky.
They were in
Absolutely
the
right.
sky. Well, this has been wonderful. I want to be mindful of time.
Oh yeah, I
could-
came in late, so I want to make sure we
I
got
could
the full,
sit with you all day.
the full Monty here.
All right, so here's an extra fun question. No, I'm not a theist. So
I'll be
I
the
don't-
judge if it's fun. Okay.
All right, so what is the difference between, because I get asked this kind of question, even though I'm not a theist and we're not into, a deity and that kind of thing, in that normal sense of that sort of thing. We do talk about consciousness. But what's the difference between the idea of a creator being, pick your deity, and that we're all in a simulation and it's a teenager in a basement somewhere in some cosmic place? Because I've heard you say that. I get asked that kind of question. So I thought, I'm going to ask you what you would say.
Well, if you are a deist, where some power, divine power, creates the universe and then lets it run its course,
Right, the clockmaker.
then there's no difference between a deist and the programmer of a simulated universe. There's no difference. So, but there is a difference between the monotheistic God who creates the universe and sets up laws that you have to behave by and what you should eat on certain days of the week. That's different from a snot-nosed kid in the parents' basement creating a universe. Because there's no evidence that they set up laws about what you should eat on Friday.
Although it does make sense.
Okay, or what animals you shouldn't kill, right, to eat. There's no,
Right.
that we don't,
Sure,
they didn't
sure,
supply the behavior manual
sure.
where we all then must do what it says. So, yeah, there's fundamentally no difference.
So
But you have to most people don't know the difference between a deist and
Deist and a
you
theist.
got to
You
actually
gotta explain
explain
that,
that. Uh-huh.
Well, also one other bonus one. So, if you don't mind, the photograph that was captured, showing us the idea of event horizon or a black hole, that sort of thing.
Yeah, the recent one.
Yeah, and some people say, okay, now this is going to supplant or replace the Earthrise photo. And when I first read that, obviously, I loved what happened, and I've said to people that it certainly confirms things of Einstein, but I'm even more interested in the new physics that might go past that idea, because I'm always looking at that relationship between like Newtonian physics and the physics that Einstein came up. But do you think? I guess I've had difficulty with
If you
that.
put low speeds and low gravity in Einstein's equations, they
Yeah.
become Newton's equations.
Okay.
So they are the same thing.
So they're the same thing.
Don't lose sleep over why they're different.
Yeah.
One becomes the other in the limits of those numbers.
Okay.
Yeah.
I like that.
And that's how advances in science have occurred since 1600.
Because a lot of people don't talk about it that way, though. They talk
That's
about
correct.
it as being two different. Yeah.
Well, they're philosophically different,
Yeah.
but they're describing the same reality. And one of them describes a reality only within certain experimental limits that Isaac Newton had been exposed to. The Einstein reality, this is embedded within it and then extends the understanding beyond it. It doesn't discard it. We got to the moon in 1969, 50 years ago, on Newton's laws.
Right.
No mention of Einstein at all.
So do you think that comment, well, that supplants the Earthrise? To me, in some ways, I get it, but I also found myself kind of, I'm thinking about it, not like, no, I don't think so. It's different.
I don't think you can pre-assert what impact a photo will have on the next generation.
That's very true.
The Earthrise photo, I have evidence to show, and I'm going to write this up eventually, maybe between now and, the Apollo anniversary. Yeah. We're past the anniversary, the 50th anniversary of the moonrise photo.
That's right.
Because that was December 1968. So that was this past December.
I remember that.
Yeah. And I tweeted about it a little bit. I didn't want it to go by unnoticed. But that photo launched the environmental movement. I don't care what anyone else says about any other force they think was operating. It launched the environmental movement. Environmental movement was not even a blip on the radar before 1969. We went to the moon to explore the moon, and we looked back and discovered Earth for the first time. And the people who took the photo, it's a beautiful photo. Oh my gosh, Earthrise. Oh, okay, cool. Any other photos? Oh, we got another mission coming. Oh, now we're going to land on the moon. And there it was, percolating, and no one saw it coming. Every major reference you may have to people caring about the environment
starts after that.
After that. The famous TV commercial with the Native American with the tear. After that. Yeah. It was like 1977, while we were going to the moon. That's how that, all the hippies, okay, they were anti-war hippies. They were not environmental hippies until after 1969.
Yeah, I don't think like Rachel Carson's book.
There are people who want to declare that, and I have strong evidence against it. Yeah. But when was DDT banned? 1973. After we landed on the moon. No, I agree. A full decade after that book came out. Yeah. When other things are happening. The Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, the Environmental Protection Agency was founded, the leaded gas was banned, lead in the environment was banned. All of this. That happened between 1969 and 1973.
No, I agree with you. That's why when they said that, when I saw that in the article, this will supplant the Earthrise, I guess because the Earthrise meant so much to me.
I don't know what the next Earthrise photo will be. Yeah. I have a sense it's not going to be the black hole photo because we are not self-referenced in the black hole photo.
Right. That's what I think.
The way we were in the Earthrise photo. So, and I think that matters if you're going to affect someone's heart and mind and soul.
Although we don't really technically believe in the soul. We're about consciousness.
Excuse me.
Oh, I love the word soul.
Soul is metaphor.
I use the word soul.
It's metaphor.
Soul man, soul
If I use it metaphorically, you don't have to then reply, we don't believe in a soul. What is that?
Well, I just wanted to...
Use other metaphors, and I don't say, technically that doesn't happen. I'm letting you get away with all your metaphors. Now I say heart, minds, and souls. Oh, we don't believe in that.
I call myself a soul man. So.